Hi, everybody. Al Bernstein here with another one of my quick hits videos. And on this one, we're going to begin our look back at the year 2017. We're going to do a series of quick hits in the next coming weeks, talking about the year 2017, which, as many of you know, I think was one of the best years boxing has had in several decades, along with the year 2013. It was a spectacular year for the sport of boxing in terms of the product that it put out to all the fans. And on this quick hits, we're going to focus in on some of the big moments and big fights during the course of this year. Now, this doesn't mean these were the best fights necessarily, though in some cases they were very good. But what this means is these were the very big moments at the apex of the sport in terms of matchups that produced giant crowds, giant pay-per-views, and great interest from the fans. And like everything, of course, the results vary in terms of how it ends up. But all four of these matches that I'm going to talk about were fascinating enough to capture the attention of boxing fans around the world. And they were some of the seminal moments of this past year. The first one I want to talk about is a fight that not only had gargantuan circumstances surrounding it, but also lived up to all the interest in the fight by creating what might be the fight of the year. It was when Anthony Joshua took on Vladimir Klitschko. Joshua defending his heavyweight title. He and Klitschko met at Wembley Stadium with a crowd of 90,000 people on hand. It was my privilege to be able to announce this fight on Showtime. And I have to say, quite simply, I have never announced a fight in an arena with 90,000 people. I've done fights in big arenas, but never of that size, of that magnitude. And the moment was extraordinary. When they were doing their walk-ins in front of that crowd, really, I had goosebumps. And it was an extraordinary experience. And then, of course, the fight lived up to all that because Anthony Joshua knocked down Klitschko early in the fight, seemed to have the advantage. It looked like he might be even coasting to a victory. And here comes Vladimir Klitschko. And he hurt Anthony Joshua badly in that fight, as you recall. And I think it was after the sixth round. It looked like Anthony Joshua was spent. There didn't really seem any way he could go on. Somehow, he found the way to continue in this fight, found a second wind, and from that point on, was able to come back and in a pitched battle against Vladimir Klitschko, was able to take him out later in the fight. It was an extraordinary moment for the fans there and the fans watching, but also for Anthony Joshua, I think, because we never know with heavyweights. We know that at some point in life, they are probably going to be hit and hurt. It's inevitable. Because they're fighting bigger men and bigger punchers, especially in that division, that is the moment in their careers when we find out a lot about them. Well, we found out a lot about Anthony Joshua. He battled being hurt and fatigue and came back in a tremendous battle in which Vladimir Klitschko went out of the sport of boxing on his shield and maybe received as much praise for that fight, a losing effort, as he has for many of his winning efforts over the many years when he was heavyweight champion. So that fight produced not only a great fight, but also a moment in boxing history that was pretty extraordinary. And pushing forward, we're hoping that that gets duplicated at some point maybe in a slightly different way when in 2018, hopefully at some point, Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder can fight. Of course, Joshua appears to be ready to fight Joseph Parker, who also has a heavyweight championship. And Deontay Wilder, it appears, is going to try again to get Luis Ortiz in the ring after Ortiz failed the drug test the last time they were to fight. Certainly, if the winner of those two fights are Wilder and Joshua, people will be clamoring for a big fight featuring them in 2018. And that would be very good for the sport as well. But the Klitschko Joshua fight was a big moment in 2017 that did produce what it was supposed to. A big moment in Las Vegas came when the long-anticipated match between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin took place. It was a fight that had been months and maybe some would say over a year or two in the making. And finally, they were able to get it worked out, and they had their fight. It was a very popular fight, both on pay-per-view and, of course, a packed arena watching as Golovkin and Canelo battled it out. It turned out to be a very good fight, not quite the war that people thought it would be. And as is often the case in boxing, controversy took over in a very close decision that not everybody was on board with, because the fight was a close fight. Golovkin never able to land quite the power punches that we are used to seeing from him, though he did land some good power punches, which Canelo showed a tremendous chin in sustaining those punches. But it was the Golovkin of the educated jab, who used his jab to control his fight and score many of his points. And it was Canelo who counterpunched and fought a more tactical fight than I think some people thought he might. Part of the reason why people thought this would be a pitched battle is because they thought these two men would be each in their wheelhouses battling it out. That did not turn out to be the case. Canelo was more tactical, and it created controversy in the final decision. They are ticketed to fight again in May of this coming year. There are no agreements signed, but that is the expectation that people have. That was a big moment and a big fight in this past year that created some unfinished business. And sometimes those fights are significant because that unfinished business fuels another fight that fans want to see. And certainly the rematch of that one is one that fans would like to see. And the perception is that that Golovkin is, for the first time, starting to show some wear and tear. He's in his 30s, and he's a fighter who's had a long amateur career with a pro career that started late. And the close decisions with Danny Jacobs and Canelo have kind of made people think that it's finally starting to erode a little bit as a fighter, and that's part of the reason why that rematch has promise to many fans that think it will be that Canelo can come on in that fight, and they want to see if he's capable of producing a better, more aggressive and offensive performance, and whether Golovkin his career has been denigrated a little bit. But make no mistake, Gennady Golovkin's still a terrific fighter. There was an event also this past year that was in some ways the biggest of all boxing events, but also the oddest. And I included in here because of its bigness, because of its, because I'm talking about big moments and big fights. And certainly on any scale, the Floyd Mayweather-Conor McGregor fight fits that description. It was a one-off in which a MMA fighter, Conor McGregor, decided to challenge a boxer, Floyd Mayweather. And because of the personalities of these two men and the inexorable hype around this fight and the huge interest, especially by, I think, mixed martial arts fans to see this happen, they were able to make this, indeed make this fight happen. And it was a fight that became the second most watched pay-per-view fight and purchased pay-per-view fight in the history of the sport. Mayweather and Pacquiao remains #1, but this one was very close, nipping on its heels, over 4 million buys. It was a fight that engendered strong passions, both pro and con, from people as to whether it was even appropriate for the sport. And the actual fight itself didn't dampen that debate, because Floyd Mayweather came out in the fight, you could tell, to see what Conor McGregor had to offer for him, and was performing in a way that was very different than what we see from Floyd Mayweather. He wasn't moving around boxing and doing the things he usually does. He was walking straight forward, kind of absorbing some of the punches that McGregor hit him with. And McGregor overperformed in those early rounds. How much of that was due to Floyd Mayweather allowing him to overperform, or the fact that McGregor was overperforming, is the part that will be debated and has been debated by boxing fans since that fight. Many people going so far, even people in boxing, to suggest that Mayweather was literally toying with him and just taking his time and could have taken him out at any time. Mayweather disputes that and says, no, I had to see what he had to offer, but, you know, I wasn't capable of taking him out earlier than I did. And part of the ploy, of course, in all that was to get McGregor past the physical time he had spent in the ring as a mixed martial artist, which is a lot less than a 12-round fight. And so Mayweather knew that once he got McGregor into the 6th, 7th, 8th rounds, that he would be able to sink him in the deep water, and he was able to do exactly that. It was a fight that produced, I thought, some interesting and fun moments in broadcasting it, and I did call that fight. I thought it was more interesting as a fight than I would have anticipated it to be. Having said that, clearly Floyd Mayweather, coming back off a layoff at age 40, showed that he still had enough skill set to handle McGregor coming over from mixed martial arts in what effectively was his first pro fight. You know, he had had amateur fights as a true boxer, but this was his first pro fight. So it was a one-off. I don't believe it portends future mixed martial arts and boxers matches. Maybe there'll be some, and there's always been rumors now about some that they're thinking about. But I think it was the two personalities of these two men and their followings that made this possible. So when you're looking back at 2017, regardless of how you feel about the validity of this matchup or in fact its results, you have to say it was a big moment in the sport of boxing in terms of interest. And a lot of the MMA people make this statement. They say that while it was they recognize that boxing had a really good year with product, to get crossover interest in boxing, some of these McGregor fans who tuned into boxing and who are now more tuned to boxing maybe than they were before, they will stick around, and maybe boxing benefited from that. We'll have to see. Down in Australia, a major event, a big event with a crowd of over 60,000 people on hand to see Manny Pacquiao battle Jeff Horn, an Australian who considered kind of a B-level, decent, pretty good fighter who had worked his way up into rankings enough so that it was acceptable for Pacquiao to take him on as a challenger, as Pacquiao got ready for what they thought might be one of his last big fights against Terence Crawford or another major opponent. It wasn't considered, for Pacquiao anyway, a fight that he entertained the idea of losing, and many of his fans didn't entertain the idea of losing. So he went down to Australia, and had Pacquiao coming into this fight had an excellent performance against Jesse Vargas and against Tim Bradley. So he had kind of resurrected himself since the Mayweather fight and shown many of the skill sets that we'd seen before from Pacquiao. So I think that, combined with the fact that Horn was, again, a good fighter who had not fought great opposition, the conception was that Pacquiao would win this fight. Well, in boxing, things don't always work out the way we anticipate they're going to. It turned out to be a really entertaining kind of, not a brawl, I wouldn't say, but a fight in which the technique went south at various points, partially because of Horn's very erratic style, put them in places in the ring that I don't think Manny Pacquiao thought they were going to be. And Manny Pacquiao's underperformance in not being able to really be as precise as he would like. The decision, which was a unanimous decision for Jeff Horn, became a flashpoint of controversy because many people thought, especially the 117-111 score that one of the judges gave, was absurd. And they felt that the judging may have been inappropriate. Certainly on the broadcast team, there was wild debate. Teddy Atlas looked like he could have had a stroke at ringside at various points. And there was distress about the actual decision. And what it did, of course, was put Manny Pacquiao in kind of a holding pattern in his career and give Jeff Horn life. He just had another win, and there's the talk that he might fight Crawford instead of Manny Pacquiao. So this big event produced an upset, a huge upset in the sport, and had big impact on Manny Pacquiao, who, even though he's in the twilight of his career, remained and does remain an international figure with great popularity in the sport of boxing, and someone who's been an icon in the sport for a couple of decades. So where this leaves Manny Pacquiao for his future remains to be seen. And for Jeff Horn, it will get him one more major fight, that's for sure, at the very least. He's in his late 20s, and he feels that that unorthodox style and the way he fights could carry him to some other victories that others may not suppose he'll get. So that was a look back at some of the big moments and the big fights that we had during the course of the year. They weren't the results of those fights, as you've seen, I've gone through. Not every one was wildly exciting, though I think 3 of the 4 for sure were well worth watching because they were competitive and intriguing. And the true part of boxing during the course of this year that we're going to talk about in our upcoming looks back will give you some of the meat on the bone of why boxing in 2017 was very, very good. But clearly these 4 fights show you one thing that's very important. On an international basis, because 2 of these fights happened outside the United States, on an international basis and including the United States, which has, I think the interest in boxing has been growing back and building a bit, the sport of boxing had some very impressive moments in terms of fan interest. And I think that's one of the keys to why 2017 was interesting. So we hope you enjoyed this look back at 2017. We'll have more in the coming weeks.